Just wanted to say I can't make it that weekend, but it's in all of the exhibits. I haven't seen the Christmas tree one, are really amazing. I mean, we were there about a month ago, and it was all incredible. So everyone will enjoy it. And the Air Force One compared to Air Force One now is tiny. When you walk through it, it's almost comical. You're like, am I on a real airplane? That's,
That's interesting. All right.
but
Well,
it was fascinating. What the docent told us was that it's obviously the planes are much bigger now and much more modernized. But as you walk through it, you realize you really are walking through an airplane that was the airplane of then. And it's fascinating to see the changes up till now.
But just to see the layout and where the press was and where Reagan sat, it's fun to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it'll be a great exhibit, and and there's 700 artifacts, authentic artifacts in the Auschwitz exhibit. So it should be really interesting. And I think right now we need to remind ourselves of where we came from and why we need to be strong and support Israel and be strong as Jews and unite and not take crap from anybody, basically, to put it bluntly. Okay. But we're still lovers. And that's where we're going to read Song of Songs. And I want to start with the blessing of studying Torah. So please join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher
kiddushanu b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei
Torah.
Okay. So today, I don't know if you looked at what I sent out. We're going to look at it. I wanted to start with my introduction and why I decided to write this thesis and sort of review the attitudes toward women since, the 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and how it changed and how women always were being told what to do, what not to do, how to be, don't be too much this, don't be too little this, or whatever. So I want to start with kind of the perspective of the 20th and 21st century attitudes toward women and sex and relationships, and then look at how this document starting next week, or if we have time, we'll start this week, was written approximately 2,400 years ago, was incredibly sensual and beautiful and free, and it was about free love and a woman actualizing her sexuality and her potential. And that's much more in our tradition than what is really I would say the Protestant ethic, the Christian ethic of chastity, virginity, repression. That is not in the Jewish, not in our tradition. And even though Hasidic tradition and teachings really put women in a corner in some ways, even in terms of modesty and sort of being hidden, covering yourself, that was not the case in the ancient world necessarily. And even within Hasidic teaching, there's still an appreciation and a value on sex and sexuality between husband and wife. But in Song of Songs, they're not married. They're lovers. And then they get married. But they start out as just incredible lovers. So I think it's interesting for us to have the perspective of what our Jewish texts tell us and not just what you hear or see today. So I'm going to start with any comment or anything anybody wants to say or ask or whatever. Okay. So I'm going to start with the introduction. Oh, wait, that's not how I'm going to do it. I have to do share. Sorry. Let's go back to this. I forget. I haven't shared all summer, so I want to share this one. Okay. So we're going to read this, and I would love to hear your comments and say, oh, yeah, that's what I was told, or oh, no, I never heard that before, or how we have evolved, even women's lib, what that did for a lot of us. So who would like to start with this thing? Come on, somebody. I don't want to call on you. Rebecca, I see you leaning forward. You're going to read.
When I was 15 years old and about to go on my first date, my mother gave me what she considered some very sage advice. Treat a man like a king and he'll always treat you like a queen. Certainly, the men in my family were treated like kings. It was the mid-1960s, and we lived on the south side of Chicago, where Jewish men were tough, working-class guys born of immigrant parents who had scraped through the Depression and clawed their way into middle class. My father and grandfathers ruled their households like benevolent despots, sitting like lords at their dinner tables as the women bustled back and forth serving them. They never lifted a finger to help around the house, yet they expected their homes to be immaculate at all times. They rarely involved themselves in raising of their children, yet they were the arbiters of discipline and punishment when their children
Misbehaved.
When the children misbehaved. Thank you. Simply by being fathers, they were automatically the heads of family, the patriarchal authorities who doled out allowances to their wives and children and had the final say in all important decisions and expected to be treated with deference and respect.
So I'm just going to stop for a minute. For how many of you does this seem familiar? Did anybody else grow up like that? You did, Rebecca. Susan, you're shaking your head. Go ahead. What do you?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. My parents were both educated. They came from educated. Now, she said it was a working class, but I don't know that it just has to do with education. My father was a psychologist, so we talked about our feelings a lot. I talked about others, and my mother went into that field too then, and she had a job that could be part-time, but it was a full-time position and she could work in the house, and they were like equal partners.
That, you know how rare that was then? That was extremely rare.
I mean, it was, I never felt that, you know.
Well, I think that was very rare for that time and very enlightened. And my parents went to college, but that didn't change this attitude. It wasn't bad, it just was the way it was. Cindy, you have your hand raised?
No, but I can comment. My father was a provider and my mother ran the household. And, it was complete division of labor, but it worked for them.
And did your father, though, make the main decisions?
No, my mother, well, anything about the household or the children, my mother did. Anything about money, my father decided. So
in my home, I mean, my mother would say, wait till your father comes home. If you were in trouble, wait till your father comes home. It was like, and then as time passed, she changed. But I'm talking, 50s, 60s, it was very much of, he was the head. And today, in a lot of fundamentalist families of both Jewish and Christian homes, it's still similar that way. And actually just heard that in one Baptist sect, a woman's prayers have to go through her husband. Her prayers are not valued.
Wow.
Have to have her husband pray for her. This is today. It's pretty interesting. So Montana, welcome. I see you're younger. What's your experience with your parental power? What was it like for you?
I would say similar to what Cindy was saying. My dad was a provider. My mom kind of ran the house, but I will say my mom, trick is the wrong word, but she kind of felt like she knew what was best to spend money on, but had to kind of make my dad think maybe it was his idea. Or she got wood floors in half the house. And then when he's like, this is nice. Maybe we should do this for the rest of the house. She's like, yeah, no kidding, buddy.
What a good idea, dear.
Yeah. So there was some of that, but it works. I mean, they're still married, so obviously it works for them.
I'm not saying it didn't work. I'm just saying that there was, and my niece, by the way, is ultra Orthodox. She became a Baal Tshuva. She's 32, which is like she returned to Orthodoxy, and she lives in a similar women here and men there, and she's not unhappy. But I think when we were growing up, for most of us, Susan Ehrlich aside, a lot of us, I would say, not most of us, there wasn't that option to have a mother who worked full time or who didn't want to do it, or there was this egalitarian thing, which there's a lot more today, but certainly in that time, I don't think it was so much of an option. Certainly, that in the 60s, even a woman could not get a credit card without her husband or father signing for it. You could
Susan,
not-
isn't there a prayer like, thank goodness I'm a man or I'm not a woman?
Yes, yes, there's a prayer that we have changed that was, that's one of the daily blessings. Thank you, God, for not making me a woman. That is a blessing that we do not say anymore, but Orthodox Jews still say. So, okay, to be continued. All right, where am I? I have to share first. I have to do share. No. Share screen. And it's the intro. Okay, share. All right. So let's keep going. Okay. All right. Montana, why don't you read?
Sure. On the other hand, the women in my family were not exactly queens. They were not co-equals. They were not partners.
I'm sorry, hold on.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
They
They
were
were-
subordinates in almost every way. They put their husbands first, their children second, everyone else next, and themselves last. I often wondered, is this what women are supposed to do? Is this supposed to make them happy and fulfilled? It's not that my mother and grandmothers appeared unhappy. Mostly they just seemed tired. Certainly not adored or worshipped. Loved, yes, but what kind of love?
Okay. Susan Ehrlich,
Yes. want
want to read?
Am I supposed to read?
Do you mind?
Yeah, no, not at all, but I do have a comment with some of this. I do, I mean, it's not always like that and not just my family. But I know if there is some division of labor that both sides accept and even want, then it could still be a co-equal marriage, you know? My mother was in charge of the house and my dad liked that and respected it, and she was happy with that too. So, and I see that in my sister who about to teshuva too, and she runs a lot in the house. So, and they're both happy with their roles. So I think if it's a partnership, it doesn't matter that women are in charge of the house if that's what they choose, and men.
I agree. This was my experience. My mother had 4 children. She had her first at 22, her last by 29. She was exhausted and she didn't have help and she could not keep the house clean. She just couldn't do it. She couldn't get all the laundry done and get the meals done or whatever. And my father, or it wasn't really my father, it was like his mother and sisters, who are immaculate housekeepers, were very critical of her.
Yeah.
And they thought, what's wrong with her? Why can't she do it? And she just couldn't do it. And I don't think she really liked it. She loved us. She loved being with her kids. She did not like housework. She did not like shopping and cleaning. And of course she had to do it. And she just was always up till 11 o'clock at night folding clothes.
She liked taking care of her 4 children.
Yeah, it was hard, really hard. But there wasn't, this is necessarily an appreciation as much as an expectation. And you felt yourself that you were failing.
Yes.
And nobody was telling you, hey, you can't, we get it. Or you didn't even feel you could ask for help because other women seemed to be doing it or whatever. But I just, you know, I just, that was I think there was, it wasn't just that there was this expectation of doing it. And, you know, when you watch TV, all the women in the 50s and 60s, the mothers, if you look, they actually cleaned house in high heels. They wore high heels and dresses. They always looked perfectly coiffed when their husbands came home and dinner was on the table. And it was like,
nylon stockings with the
That was the Donna Reed show. She always had her pearls on.
that's right. Or, you know, Ozzie and Harriet or Father Knows Best or all those things. Hello, dear. And but they all wore high heels and lovely dresses, and they were like vacuuming in their heels. And even if you look at old ads in magazines, the women are wearing dresses and heels while they're cleaning. And it's just, there was this like cultural idea of the ideal wife and mother, which I think a lot of women struggled with and then felt it was their fault that they couldn't do it, as opposed to it's really hard and I just can't do it. And anyway, okay, so a little more, Susan.
From as far back as I could remember, my grandparents had slept in twin beds. My parents shared a double bed, but even the mention of sex made my mother blush. Sex was never discussed, almost as if it was shameful. The result was that the totality of my sexual education consisted of a book on menstruation that I received when I was 12, and a request by my mother that I remain a virgin until I got married. I knew nothing about what a man and a woman did in the bedroom. I was clueless about sexual gratification or desire. In fact, I was almost 14 before I discovered that men and women have sex for pleasure and not just to have babies. The message was clear. A woman's happiness was tied to her husband and children, not to her own body or emotional fulfillment.
Well, that was my experience growing up. I just did. I wasn't unhappy. I just didn't know any better. That's all I knew. And I remember my mother gave me a book, and here you are. And somebody, when I was 14, or I think it was 13, told me that men and women had sex, not just for babies. I went, what? They do?
Right. And then did you think, oh, maybe that's my parents then too? I
think about them later. My father, I mean, things changed so much. My father actually once told me, and I didn't even want to know this, that my mother was great in bed. I said, Dad, I really don't want to know this.
Right.
Things changed, but it's like my sister and I had to open the door to the conversation. They would not talk about it, even though they were living this life that I had no idea about. Okay, so, all right, who else? Cindy, you want to read?
Society reinforced this idea. A real lady does not concern herself with sex. Men do not respect women who are too sexy. In the movies, sexual women were considered tramps and always came to a bad end. The same went for sexy movie stars. Marilyn Monroe committed suicide. Elizabeth Taylor was divorced 6 times. If you care too much about sex, you will end up unhappy and even alone.
And don't you remember, some of us, that if you sat with a dress, you always had to keep your legs together. Don't spread your legs, be aware, there was all of this like double standard, because guys were considered, virile. And women,
no patent leather shoes.
I never heard that. Oh, because of the reflection? I never heard that. But
it's a Catholic thing.
What was that? I didn't hear what Cindy said.
No patent leather shoes.
Oh.
Because guys could look up your dress from the reflection.
That's interesting, because they were very popular when I was a little girl, like 2 years old.
Well,
no one wanted to look up my dress then.
Exactly. Okay, one more, Cindy.
It didn't seem fair. Men were admired for being playboys and charming seducers, while women were condemned. Men were definitely kings, but when it came to Jewish queens, the most well-known is Queen Esther, who was married off to an imbecile Persian tyrant against her will, and then pressured to risk her life to save the Jewish people. She was remembered to this day as a great heroine who was willing to sacrifice herself for the sake of others. There is an entire Megillah in the Ketuvim section of the Hebrew Bible named after her. But whatever personal dreams or hopes or desires Esther had were never mentioned because they are not important. Is this what my mother meant by being treated like a queen?
That's right. I always found Queen Esther a bit, I don't know. No, I guess she was fine. She's not my favorite. I really prefer Deborah and Judith and some of the other ones. So any comments or anything? I mean, okay, you can disagree. You can agree. I'm curious about your opinion. We're talking, things changed, obviously. Gloria Steinem and her entire friend group changed our lives radically. But this is kind of, what was after World War II. It's so interesting because we think of World War II, and this happened after World War I. during the war, women did everything, both wars. They worked in factories, they ran businesses, they went out and did, anything they wanted. And then the war ended and the men came home and they lost all their jobs and they were told to go back to the house, to the kitchen, because you can't take away a job from a working man. And plus they were paid less for sure for the same jobs. And it must have been so frustrating for so many women who, there's a really interesting, I wrote a movie actually about World War I. Wrote a miniseries, and there was a group of college girls from Vassar and Radcliffe who during World War I, these were rich girls who had their own cars. And they took their cars on ships and went to France and drove them as ambulances. And they were like in the thick of the war, and they were in the hospitals, and they were doing everything. And then when they came back, it was like, okay, get married, have kids, stay home. And a lot of them said they were never really happy again. That was the most meaningful part of their lives. And, and then they were just sort of, sent back to this stale sort of limited life. And after World War, we know Rosie the Riveter, such a famous image of the women who were building the planes and the factories and everything. And then they were the same. Go home. You can't have this job. This was a man's job, and we need to give it back to him. And there was no room for women. And so that's kind of a mentality that existed, for a while among some of us, or our mothers or grandmothers. So now then things started to change. Okay, Lori, I saw you wait, I want to make this smaller. How do I do this? How do I do this? Okay, there you go. All right, Lori, do you want to read? Lori? No, yes. I can't see you, so I don't know. Okay, Merle, do you want to read?
Okay. Fast forward to 1969, the year of the anti-war movement, and more important to millions of young women like myself, the beginning of the women's liberation movement. Women's Lib, as we called it, turned our lives upside down, transforming good girls into free women who were fighting for their social, economic, and sexual rights. Early feminists believed that when a woman asserted her own sexual needs and was sexually free, she was expressing her independence and striking back against male dominance and manipulation. Inspired by such feminist classics as Kate Miller's Sexual Politics and Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch, women were out and buried their bras and burned their bras in small print and
I'm sorry.
That's okay. And exploring their sexuality. And by the way, Bonnie is on now.
Hi, Bonnie. We're so happy to have you.
Hi, guys, but I'm not showing my face, so it's not pretty today.
Oh, your face.
I missed you all, though.
Always pretty.
You're always pretty. Okay, should I make it bigger, Merle?
No, I'm okay. The results were not exactly what we expected. While men were happy about all the free sex, it did not change their chauvinistic views about women, and in fact labeled a lot of liberated women as men-gators, castrators, or emasculating lesbians. Furthermore, a backlash caused against
ensued.
Oh,
a backlash ensued.
Oh, caused against these crazy feminists. A perfect example being the best-selling nonfiction book of 1974, The Total Woman, by Maribel Morgan.
Yeah.
In an evangelical Christian who despised the women's movement, Morgan preached that a total woman caters to her man's special quirks, whether it be in salad, sex, or sports.
Oh my God.
And instructed wives to greet their husbands at the front door wrapped in transparent saran wrap. It only It's only when a woman surrenders her life to her husband, reveres and worships him, and is willing to serve him that she becomes really beautiful to him.
Okay. How many of you remember that, Maribel Morgan? You don't remember that?
I don't remember her, but I remember the preachings in her writings.
There was a huge backlash. So all women, were saying we should be free, we should be able to do what we want. And then there was a huge backlash, and you're being a slut, and that's, you have to take care of your man. And she did say, be sexy at all times. Don't clean your house in high heels. Meet your husband naked, wrapped in saran wrap. I remember that. I mean, I actually took this from a quote from her book, and these are quotes of how she said, so there was a huge backlash. So, it was never a forward thing. I mean, to this day, we're still going backward. Look how they ripped apart Hillary Clinton or women for their clothes, for their body, for their hair, for whatever. It's really, really hard for women.
Really.
So, does anybody have any memories or comments about this or disagreements? I'd like to.
Fascinating Womanhood is what I remember, that author. Fascinating Womanhood. It was a different one than this one.
Right. And it was the same idea?
It was a similar thing that actually a lot of it was just kind of trickery. Make your, or subterfuge. Agree with your husband, but cause a husband to move in the direction you want to, or.
Right, that's what Montana said her mother did.
Yeah, so they were along the same path, but it was called Fascinating Woman.
Yeah, and make him think it's his idea, though it's your idea.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And so, that's different than appreciating your husband or praising him or thanking him or loving him. There was an unbelievably great article in the New York Times. I always read Modern Love. The news is so sad. My first place in the Sunday New York Times is the style section, where I read about the weddings. And then I read Modern Love. And there was this one woman who wrote, said, how Shamu taught me to, train my husband or whatever. But she had a job at SeaWorld training porpoises. And there was a certain technique where you ignored anything they did wrong and praised everything they did right. And eventually the porpoises just did what you wanted. So she said, I think I'll try this on my husband. So no matter what he did wrong, she said nothing. But when he did the smallest thing, like put his clothes in the hamper instead of on the floor, honey, I can't tell you how happy I am. Thank you so much for that. And she just lavished praise at him for everything he did right. And eventually he changed, he transformed. And, he was much, things just got better between them without her ever complaining or correcting. So I think that's different.
It's classic operant conditioning.
Yes, exactly. But it was funny that she first did it on a porpoise.
Yes.
And then she did it on her husband. And she said it was the same thing. And then she said the end was, I think I'm going to start it on my children.
Yes, I think it's a current way to raise children.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's not the same as, completely repressing and become subservient to such a degree that, and surrendering all your own will. That's different. So there is room in any human relationship to praise, appreciate, communicate, as opposed to completely obliterate your own identity in order to make things work. So, okay. So I just want to yes. Oh, sorry, Rebecca. Yes.
Does anybody remember EST?
Yeah.
Okay, so I took a class in the early 80s that was called Women's Sex and Power. It was taught by an EST graduate. He called it his thing was the Sterling Institute. So he had one called Women's Sex and Power and one called Men's Sex and Power. And so we were all crammed into an auditorium for the weekend. We were able to take pee breaks though, but it was the same thing as the porpoise. His whole thing was you just have to let these men be apes, let them swing from the chandeliers, let them be what they want, and praise them for what they do good. It really didn't satisfy a lot of us because it still never really addressed how do you divide up the responsibilities of children and work. But it was the same concept.
Yeah, so I know a lot of people don't like her, Dr. Laura Schlesinger, on the radio, just because honestly, I love to hear people's problems. I'm very nosy, so I love to hear their problems. And her thing is that, well, there's, about getting your husband to do things is being sweet, asking for what you want, but doing it in a sweet way and being very appreciative, in terms of, but that's like concrete things. The ultimate respect between a man and a woman, I think that's inherent or not, and you have to just choose a person that you feel has that. Says, choose wisely, treat kindly. Was her mantra for a good relationship, and I think that goes for any friendship. Choose a person that you respect and treat them kindly. So there's all these different techniques, and Song of Songs has its own special technique that I think you'll find very interesting. Okay, share screen and Song of Songs. And who has not read? Diane, do you want to read?
Where do you want me to start? In other words?
Yes.
Okay. In other words, it was the same old
mantra.
Treat your man like a king and forget about yourself. His happiness will be your happiness. This idea was repugnant to many women, but obviously not to everyone. It sold 10 million copies.
Keep going.
By the 1980s, women were gaining ground in the workplace, but their relationship with men were more confused than ever. It seemed that the more successful and self-oriented women became, the less many of them were able to find love and fulfillment. It seemed that many men did not really care for the new woman and were backing away from forging committed relationships. Women began to feel desperate, and suddenly the bookstores were filled with books with such titles as Men Who Hate Women and the Women Who Love Them, Women Who Love Too Much, and Smart Women, Foolish Choices.
So remember those books? Oh
Yes.
my God. I had a lot of those books on my shelf myself. I mean, it's amazing when you look back at the sort of evolution and all the whole trip, the whole journey to where we are. Okay, Laura, why don't you read?
In 1991, Susan Faludi published her seminal work, Backlash, which cataloged the problems women were having supposedly due to female equality. Among those mentioned are burnout, infertility, a man shortage, depression, low self-esteem, and loneliness. Though Faludi argued that these difficulties were in fact due to the lack of real equality for women, by the end of the 20th century, many others felt differently.
Okay.
You want me to go on?
Yeah.
In dispensing the spoils, women's liberation has given my generation high incomes, the option of single parenthood, rape crisis centers, personal lines of credit, free love, and female gynecologists. Mona Sharon, a young law student, writes in the National Review in an article titled The Feminist Mistake. In return, it has effectively robbed us of one thing upon which the happiness of most women rests, and that's men. In her review,
Just a second. So this idea in the end of the 20th century and now into the 21st century is, yeah, we got all these freedoms, all these rights, but according to her, now men don't like these kind of women, or women are, they're overworked, they're striving, they're doing all this stuff, but they can't get a relationship. So this was a feeling. So Montana, how old are you? You're our,
I'm about to turn 31.
okay. So then you were just, a kid when the turn of the 20th century. But I don't know, any others of you remember, or what's it like today for guys and girls? Is it easier to connect, or what do you think, Montana?
Oof. Well, I am gay personally, so I don't really do a lot of connecting with men.
What
But
about even in the gay community? Is it easier? Is it the same? It's always been easier. I'm not sure.
with women, like for women,
yeah.
I think it's a little easier because I think women just naturally feel more comfortable in the presence of other women. And there's an innate closeness and connection. So I think that part is easy, but the same, you have a crush, you're nervous, you text them, do they text you back? I think that's sort of a universal feeling.
Is there a resentment if one is more successful than the other?
I don't think in the same way, because there isn't that expectation. That patriarchy involved.
Right. I mean, I'm not married. I never married. I had a lot of boyfriends, but ultimately I was extremely successful young. Like when I was 31, I had a play on Broadway. And I can't tell you how many men said to me, well, what do you need a man for? You make your own money. And, or they found ways to, they couldn't stand it. They could not stand it. And I think even today, sometimes in relationships, when you're equal, it seems okay. But if the woman starts to surpass and do much better, it's a problem. And ultimately, I just said, okay, forget it. And then I adopted a baby on my own, as you all know, and said, I'm Gloria Steinem says, what did she say? We become the men we want to marry. I mean, it's like, I just forged my own life. And then she also said this, which I don't know if you agree with, but it's a nice saying. She said, the best men marry and the best women don't. Which I don't know if that's true at all, because a lot of great women marry if they just found the great men. But this idea that, a lot of women, certainly in this transition, they were claiming all their equality and their power, and a lot of men were not happy with it. I think this has changed a lot because a lot of young men have been raised by feminist mothers or by egalitarian parents, and they have a model, and they don't even think, some of them don't even think about it, but some still do. And so this is, we're just tracking the history. Okay, so who has not read? I haven't read. I haven't seen everybody. Has anybody not read? Somebody like to read? Start reading. I can't see you all.
In her review, Domestic Tranquility, a brief against feminism by F. Carolyn Graziola, and What Our Mothers Didn't Tell Us, Why Happiness Eludes the Modern Woman by Danielle Crittenden, Noemi Emery writes, if women today have the freedom to work, to express themselves, and to earn their own livings, they also have some freedoms that they may not want. The freedom or pressure to sleep with men they do not like much. The freedom to be dumped by the men that they sleep with. The freedom to be dumped in middle age. Even when a man commits, problems still may exist. This may not be the marriage that your parents had. As Crittenden writes, the same impulse that leads men to sleep with women and not call them again, or date a woman for months and then vanish at the first inquiry of seriousness, affects those men who take the step of getting married, but then blanch at any escalation of responsibility, such as having a child or buying a house. The unreliable man meets his perfect match in the autonomous woman who has been told by feminists that merging her life with a man is emotional suicide.
Wow.
Oh,
So, okay, and then today, even in the LGBTQ community, there's this thing called ghosting, which is right. And ghosting is sort of a similar thing where you date someone, or sometimes now it's all online, they court you and blah, 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 or they take you out once or twice, they sleep with you, and then they literally disappear. I mean, you don't even ever hear from them again. You don't know where they are or whatever, and they've become ghosts. So also today, honestly, there's so many different permutations of emotions. It's so complex. And there's actually, and there's like, there's actually a term, I can't think of what it's called, for people who will only sleep with somebody they like. There's a name for that, as opposed to when, you know, we just
Demisexual.
what's it called?
Demisexual.
Demisexual. You're a demisexual if you only sleep with someone you like, as opposed to most of us, that's all we did, sleep with someone we liked. But now, is there pressure to sleep with anyone and everyone? Would you say, Montana?
Yeah, I think demisexual sounds sort of like most women, you know, like that's just seems kind of automatic. I think different people are different, but I do think there's a high expectation that if you go out, you have a good time, you're probably going to have sex.
And if you don't want to, something's wrong with you?
And like, I feel like men probably are more pressury, but yeah, or I think like some people just think, what are we doing here? If we're not going to have sex, but it depends also if you're interested in being in a longer term relationship or not.
Wow, isn't that fascinating? And actually, I have heard that COVID kind of changed the equation because people could only meet online for a while. And so they had all this time to talk to each other and get to know each other before they ever met in person and deciding whether or not they were going to proceed in some sexual way. And then I also think about, have any of you ever heard of the term bundling in terms of courtship? So in the colonial times in America, you know what I'm talking about, Lori?
Yeah.
What was it?
It had to do with having a board between the man and the woman if they were sleeping in the same bed.
Right. It was so cold. It was so cold because you didn't have heat, right? So in these places that if a man and a young teens or, 18, 19, for courting, they would get in bed, bundled up in all their clothes, everything, covers, and put a board between them. And then they would get to know each other or talk. It was their date. Your date was lying in a warm bed with a board between you and talking.
Oh, God.
That existed in colonial times in America. So this idea, there was always been, I just thought that was so interesting. I love that, and there was no sex or no, I don't even think they touched. I don't know if they were alone in the room. I think they were alone in the room, but the propriety was the board and the bundling was to keep warm because it was freezing. Okay, so let's continue this introduction. Okay, so now here's all these problems. Okay, who wants to read who hasn't read? Is anybody not? Montana, why don't you read?
Sure. What then is the solution? Must a woman give up her autonomy and her identity and submerge her needs in order to find a man to love her? Must his happiness always come before her own? Perhaps there are techniques or tricks that can win men over. In 1995, Ellen Fain and Sherry Schneider published The Rules, which became an instant bestseller. In this book, a woman is ordered to follow a strict set of strange and often hypocritical behaviors in order to win herself a man. Among them are: don't talk to a man first and don't ask him to dance. Don't stare at a man or talk too much. Don't meet him halfway or go Dutch on a date. Don't call him and rarely return his calls. So funny. Always end phone calls first. Don't accept a Saturday night date after Wednesday. Always end the date first. Stop dating him if he doesn't buy you a romantic gift for your birthday or Valentine's Day. Don't see him more than once or twice a week. No more than casual kissing on the first date. Don't tell him what to do. Let him take the lead. Don't open up too fast.
These are all these rules. This book also was a huge bestseller. Can you believe what women have been going through and trying to find a partner? It's unbelievable. Okay, finish this paragraph.
Sure.
Montana.
One would have to laugh if these rules were not so ridiculous and sad. What the authors are basically telling a woman is to not be herself because her true self is unacceptable and might scare a man away. Rather, she should play a phony game that has no relation to her authentic emotion or desires.
Okay. I'm just going to read this one. In another attempt to guide women, in July 2011, issue of Cosmopolitan magazine published Cosmo's Top 50 Relationship Rules, in which they put together a list of the most spot-on tips we've ever heard. Though many of these rules seem reasonable, they must not have worked, because in their February 2014 issue, Cosmopolitan published another article entitled Cosmo, the New Dating Rule. Okay, who hasn't read? Rebecca, why don't you read?
If you type relationships for women onto Amazon.com, you'll get a list of 99,760 books. The quest for love and happiness is obviously a huge concern to women in 2014.
Okay, that's when I wrote this, in 2014. So I should update it, but I'm sure it's just a higher number, but this is when I wrote this thesis. Okay.
She is caught between trying to maintain her own identity and fulfilling her needs and making a man happy enough to devote himself to her. True, our mothers made good marriages, but they had to almost disappear to do so. We, on the other hand, have independence, success, and power, but now it's the men who have disappeared. Relationships are complicated, difficult, soul-shattering, and blissfully rapturous. How does one find the right man, attract him, marry him, and keep him? Is it possible for a woman to treat a man like a king and have him treat her like a queen who is his partner and his equal? I believe it is possible. I believe that the steps to achieve this goal can be found in a book not listed among the 99,760 titles on Amazon.com. This book was written 2,400 years ago. Like Esther, it is also in the Ketuvim section of the Hebrew Bible, but it is completely different. It is called Song of Songs, and I believe it contains a guide to sex, love, and happiness.
Wow.
So I thought it was important to give you like the, sort of the journey of just the last, 120 years, or no, 100 years, I guess, or 75 years of all the things that, people. Oh, Marilyn, do you have something to say? Oh, no, it's my hand on there, not yours. And that there's been every kind of permutation. So if you were going to give a relationship rule of your own, because I don't want to start the next week, what we're going to look at is the scholarship behind it, because Song of Songs has been interpreted in multiple ways, both by Jews and Christians. And Rabbi Akiva, this is something we'll read next week, said, he's the Talmudic scholar, said that the Bible is holy, but the Song of Song is the holy of holies. Mm-hmm. And he says this is the holiest book in the Torah. So why is that when you see all the texts about breasts and legs and thighs and lips and sex and pleasure, and you'll say, why is this holy of holies? And we'll look at that. I mean, it's not just about that. I believe there's advice in this poetry that tells you exactly how to treat a partner in order to have a fulfilling relationship, any partner, because I want to include, all kinds of relationships in this. Even though it's between a man and a woman, it really can be applied to anybody, any partners, in my opinion. So he said it was the Holy of Holies, and it was highly popular and read. And we even have a little hint of what romance was like, because this is in the Talmud, there was a special holiday called Tu B'Av. Who knows what Tu B'Av is? Susan.
Isn't that a day of love?
It's like the ancient Israelite Valentine's Day. It was a day of love, but on that day and the night of Yom Kippur Day, the break the fast night, they said these were the two times that the women of Israel would go out dressed in white and dance outside the walls of Jerusalem. And then they would all find partners and flirt. And they even said that they all wore white so that everybody would look the same. Nobody had fancier clothes, all the girls dressed in white, and they went out and they danced. And it was like a courting time to find your beloved. You would do it out there at that time. So there was a lot of romance, in ancient Israel, a lot of freedom, I think, for the youth to connect. And so we're going to look at that as well. And I just want to end, I'm going to end like 3 minutes early. It's okay. I want to end with this idea of the title of Song of Songs is Shir HaShirim Asher LeShlomo, which is Song of Songs according to Solomon, King Solomon, because there is a tradition that King Solomon wrote this, or he's the lover in it. But scholars say that's not the true, because it was written way after King Solomon, like hundreds of years. King Solomon was in 900 BCE. This is written in like 400 BCE. So no. But in Hebrew, there are vowels under the letters. And according to what the vowels are, the word changes. The word changes depending on where the vowels are. So Shlomo, the name of King Solomon, comes from Shalom. Shalom comes from the word shalem, which means not just peace, but being full, being filled, or being full, complete. So I have reinterpreted this Shir HaShirim Asher LeShlomo, Song of Songs according to Solomon, to Shir HaShirim Asher LeShlomah. It could say Shlomah, which means Song of Songs according to her fulfillment. Because Shlomah is her completeness, or her completeness. So we're going to look at this as Song of Songs according to her, meaning a woman's completeness. And I believe that I'm suggesting that a wise woman, an experienced woman who understands love and romance and relationships wrote this. And it's her guidebook to relationships. And we're going to see all the secrets that she reveals in this text. So I hope you'll find it interesting. I found it really interesting. It was so much fun. And once I started writing it, I just saw all the answers there. And the professor, who was sort of like my sponsor of, writing this, he said, "Oh my God, I've never seen this before, but it completely works." In other words, it makes sense. There's hundreds. It turns out Rabbi Nickerson also wrote his thesis on Song of Songs, but I'm sure it's completely different.
We'll have to compare them after this class.
Yeah.
You said next week. Are we meeting?
Oh, I mean, in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
Next time. Next time. So I want to wish you a beautiful week. Anything else you want to say? Anything?
I wanted to ask you, did you write this thing?
Yeah.
Okay, that was yours.
It's mine. It's my introduction. And then the scholarship that I'm going to present next time is like all the Talmudic, Christian, all the different views of Song of Songs and what it means. And then the time after that, we'll actually look at the text and start pulling it apart and understanding what it could mean, what it does mean, what are the hidden messages in it. So I think it'll be fun.
That's great.
So everyone, it was lovely to see you, and have a beautiful week, and Shabbat Shalom this weekend. And let's stay strong, and Am Yisrael Chai. Am
Shabbat
Yisrael.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.